Testing audio, testing audio. Check, check,
Uh,
check.
I hear you, I hear you, I hear you.
All right. Well, first things first, I apologize. I did not send out an announcement for topic this week.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I couldn't remember if you had and thought you hadn't.
Well, I thought last week worked well. We had two topics that we kind of focused on for about an hour and a half. And I
Yeah.
thought that was a good way to focus.
Yeah, by the way, Sabina Hassenfelder posted a video during the week about Yuval Noah Harari. Different interview. It was the one with Christiane Amanpour, but same topic. I mean, the
Oh,
same.
well, he's got the same book, right, that he's pushing.
Yeah, it's the Nexus book, but
Right.
uh, I
So,
didn't watch the Christiane Amanpour interview, but I did watch the Sabina discussion of it.
what was her takeaway?
Um, Mixed. She had some criticisms of him being a medieval historian. She thought that he was perhaps not the best expert on modern topics like AI, but she also said she didn't really disagree that much with what he said. Maybe an item or two that she thought was perhaps a bit insufficiently researched or something. But
I would say that's kind of how I felt, after watching the Ari Melber interview because I've known of him before. I actually tried reading his Sapiens book probably 5 or 6 times, never actually got all the way through it. But I've heard him speak before, and he mostly has good insights that he can bring to the modern perspective. Although he certainly has that bit of ego that says, I can basically counter the common wisdom, and that's what he's basically doing to look smart. So he's got a bit of that in him.
well, I mean, it's a useful function to be a conscientious skeptic of modern perspective. Modern perspectives tend to be a bit parochial or self-serving, and he tries to look back on patterns from history that militate against uh, overly optimistic modern views of where things are going.
Would it also balance overly pessimistic?
Uh, Perhaps, I don't know. Also, there was a video. Brian Greene had yet another short video this week, also on AI, but about AI in the arts. I thought was kind of interesting. He had on two women who had differing perspectives about the benefits and downsides of AI becoming tools of the world of the arts. One thought it would be an enhancement to human creativity. Another one thought it would um, rule a lot of artistic workers out of work.
Okay, let me try this on you and see if it makes sense to you. You're one of the few people I would try this out on. AI attempts to take the concave n-dimensional space of human behavior and push its limits using the patterns that it recognizes. However, true creativity needs to push in a convex way. It needs to be able to reach in new dimensions that have not previously been exposed or used for training data. So by training data, I mean both to AI bots as well as to young humans. So I think that AI can do a lot because there's a lot of people who cannot, even today, take the concavity of the n-dimensional space of human knowledge and make sense out of it in constructive ways. There's a lot of people who are very, very bad at that. And even if you're good at that, you cannot even hope to cover the immense world of knowledge that has been through thousands of years of history now and collected and written about. Okay, so that's a statement that I would try on you, whereas I would not try that statement on hardly anyone else. Now, I can explain further what I mean by concavity and convexity if you'd like.
No, it's okay. Some sufficient metaphor. The proponent pointed out she didn't use the word fusion, but there's a movement in the artistic community called fusion, where you take two seemingly unrelated varieties of art and you hybridize or blend them. in ways that have never been connected before. And one of the things that the AIs can do is they can do fusion. Now, they don't always do it in an artistic way. Sometimes they're rather jarring, but a lot of art that's considered innovative is fusion, especially I can say in music, and maybe a little bit in dance too, although I'm not much of an expert on dance. And so the proponent thought that creativity limited to fusion, combining two seemingly dissimilar species, that AI could do that and generate things that may or may not be considered interesting and artistic, but it can generate a lot of it. As to genuine creativity, they didn't, both of them are a little bit pessimistic about how really fundamentally innovative AI can be, apart from just the fusion methodology. So I'm not so sure that that's true outside of sort of the ChatGPT, the large language models. I think some of the mathematical stuff, they can find novel proofs of theorems. But that's ChatGPT doesn't do that kind of stuff. I see you put your hand up.
See, to me, I think the kinds of derivations that logic or math or geometry afford are probably more likely the areas where it can actually be rather productive. I don't mean creative, but productive.
Yeah, finding things that don't imitate what humans have already done and blend them. So and also sort of combining human artistry with the information processing power of AI allows human artists to work in partnership with an AI to create varieties of artistic work that a human operating with their own resources doesn't have the time or energy or computing power to do. And there weren't very many examples of that, but I understand that point is, the better tools you have, the more you can be creative. Just like a person working on a lathe, wood turning, they can create things that they couldn't have created without the lathe.
Yeah. I read a Reddit post this morning that actually concisely expressed something that I strongly agreed with, which is the top two factors in whether one enjoys one's work is first, the people you're working with, second, tools you work with.
Right.
Now, the people you work with includes your immediate boss. And by the way, that's probably the single hugest factor, okay? That's about 70% of job satisfaction right there is how well you get along with your boss. Okay?
Yeah.
But to generalize, it's boss plus your colleagues, which is, one factor, which is who you work with. And the second is the tools you work with. Yeah. So on those metrics, I think, I'm going to be much, much clearer when I'm looking around for my next gig.
Yeah. And I would add also the consumers. Now, if you're working in a big industry, you don't work with the consumers, but very small entrepreneurs who do custom work intimately with the consumer. So depending on the kind of thing you're working on, you do also get interaction with your consumers, especially if it's a small audience of consumers. People in the arts working with live audiences, they get a lot of feedback from live audiences that you wouldn't do if you were doing film or writing a text for general publication.
Well, I had a train of thought that I lost. I'm going to try and see if I can come back to it. It was about the productivity notion of AI. I think there's a difference between productivity and creativity, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, mass production isn't very creative at all, except for the original design.
But think of it this way, though. Think of it this way, Barry. In, let's say, manufacturing processes or tedious mechanical processes, you think productivity is repetitive, right? But in knowledge work, if you come up with the same fact or the same document or the same legal contract or whatever repeated, that's not productive because that's been done already, right?
Yeah.
So being productive in knowledge work is different in quality than being productive in mechanical work. So the fact that you can take two facts or two models and create a derivative of it, an immediately plausible and justifiable and defensible new document, poem, song, statement, theory, whatever, that is a productivity notion in knowledge work that does create something new. So it could be mistaken as creativity, but it doesn't have to be, right? You take a look at all these grad students looking at, minor little tweaks on the latest great professor's theorem, right? This is not 3.2, it's 3.1, okay? I read a thesis on that one, okay? I mean, it's productive, but is it truly creative? So I think that these bots can be productive in that way, but I'm not yet convinced, as you're not, that they can truly be creative, although I think it's possible. I'm just saying it's not there yet.
Yeah, the example that was discussed in Brian Greene's interview was in storycraft. If you write a story that's creative and novel, of course, the printing press is just making mass duplicate, Xerox copies. But in generating a story, both in computer games and in general story writing, the AI can generate a story that's customized to the individual consumer. So it's never the same story exactly twice. And there was some dispute over whether that's considered creative or not. Whether if you perform a play on stage, it's never exactly the same any two performances, whereas a film is. And if the actors are modulating their performance depending on the audience reaction, especially comedy, because laughter is a big thing that modulates the performance of a comic actor. The same is true of AI generating an interaction, whether or not it will perturb or modulate the story as a function of the consumer. And is that considered creative? And that's sort of up for debate, I guess. How creative is that?
But I think regardless of how you answer that question, it's a matter of time and it's a matter of depth. Because over time and over the quality of the questions that you ask, I think we're all getting at what makes us human. What makes a bot not human? And that is the interesting question ahead of us. Because more and more, it's able to do what we used to think of as human activity, right? So what does it really mean to be human?
Yeah. Or what does it mean, more generally, what does it mean to be conscious? Because humans are considered conscious, and it's not yet clear whether machines have achieved the level of intelligence that is conscious. And a good example of that is if you consume a lot of raw material, different perspectives, you may notice that different writers have competing perspectives. And you may say, well, they can't both be correct. And maybe they're both a little bit wrong. And you might try to generate a model which is better than anything that you've read on paper, or maybe resolve which one is better. The current chatbots don't do that. They'll say, well, there are multiple perspectives, and they'll recite the multiple perspectives and even point out that they're competing perspectives, but it won't try to resolve which one is more reliable or how to synthesize something that takes the best of both. Whereas a human, a good human reader will do that. They'll read multiple perspectives and then generate something that's like the New York Times op-ed people that, a new insight. On the other hand, if you have a conversation with the Chat GPT, you can highlight these differences and get the AI to say, well, that's a very good point. That's, that this author sort of left out this factor, which is sort of overlooked in that other one highlighted a different factor. And maybe that's worth thinking through, but it doesn't necessarily know how to resolve it unless there's some mathematical reason for criticizing. Oh, there's Heiner.
Yep. Willkommen, Heiner. Heiner, we were speaking about what makes us human. now that we can see that bots are getting smarter and smarter and able to do more and more things and more productivity. And we're talking about the difference between knowledge work productivity versus creativity. Not mechanical work, but knowledge work. And so I was arriving at this question, what really makes us human? And then Barry added, what really makes us conscious? So that's where we were. So given your decades of experience, answer all my questions.
With
No,
insightful, creative answers.
I can only say I envy you. My mind, even when I see this topic very thrilling and relevant, my mind is totally somewhere else. I just wanted to check if you're still around and that we continue with this effort every week. So my whole thing here is topsy-turvy, and I have to close in a few minutes. But I just wanted to tell you, I really adore how you are really digging deep on these issues, because they are very relevant. And I just feel I cannot contribute much at this point.
Even that is a contribution, Heiner. Well,
Well,
I can dig.
no communication is also communication.
That's right. And even if you can't dig, I want to be able to borrow your tools so I can dig. Hey, by the way, before you leave, Dave Tex Smith from Australia, is going to be on this channel in 5 hours at 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. East Coast time here. Okay. He said he hadn't connected with us in quite a while. So I said, well, let's do it at a time that's more hospitable to Australia. Because right now, I think it's about 3 a.m., 3:17 a.m. Australia time. So I said, okay, let's do it a little bit later and let's see if you actually enjoy what we're doing here. So you don't have to join, but I'm just letting you know in case you'd like to join. Okay, so it's in a little under 5 hours.
Okay, I love him dearly. I would love to also see him again. 5 hours from now here is quite late.
I know.
But thank you for telling me. And please do a proper election.
I would if I could, Heiner. I don't think
we all trust you because you're the only safe rail, safeguard, savior for all this mess.
You know, that's an interesting question because I think one good way to use bots is to get rid of all this stupidity, you know, in the political dialogue. It can expose in a more objective way than it can just by having, you know, loud people and rich people, you know, take over the airwaves. So if people can go to a bot and the bot can intricately and meticulously show how this is false or this is true, then it could, at least for those on the fence, have an influence. Not everybody can have that influence. You're showing a picture of something on your Purdue sweatshirt, Barry?
Yeah, you asked about, it says Purdue Grandpa. This belonged to my
Grandpa.
father.
Okay. Okay.
It belonged to my father when his grandchildren, my brother's children, went to
I mean,
Purdue.
grand uncle.
Yeah, I'm the grand uncle. I'm not the grandfather, but you know, my father owned this T-shirt 40 years ago, and eventually my mother gave it to me.
Oh, it's in good shape for 40-year-old T-shirt.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure my father wore it all that often. So
I have an MIT sweatshirt that's in exactly the same condition. You know,
yeah.
Got it 40 years ago. I haven't worn it since. Anyway, Heiner, thank you for that contribution. And I think though that there is a quality that comes out of conversation after years and years and years of exploring similar topics that you cannot get on just one first visit, especially among people who don't know each other. We didn't know each other 7, 8 years ago.
Well, it's been longer, but I extend greetings, greet him, and let's see what is possible, because the issues are critical and pressing. So anyway, over and out. Bye.
Bis später.
Bis später.
Okay. So Barry, where were we?
Well, we're talking about consciousness and being human, and whether or not it's a better question to say, are machines human than are machines conscious? Although I will say that there was a debate among philosophers about the difference between humans and machines, and the question of whether or not a human is an instance of a machine or not. And my favorite, well, there were two favorite quotes of mine on that topic. One was by Jacob Bernowski, who said, if we're any kind of machine at all, we are learning machines. That's Bernowski. And
Some of us.
the other quote by Raymond Smullyan is, I never realized that machines could be so marvelous.
Or that humans could be so mechanical.
Yeah. So, but the theory of computation, that what's computable is defined mathematically, is that any information processing organism or machine or device is fundamentally limited by the mathematical definition of what you can compute by an information processing substrate. And when Dan Dennett gave a talk, he wrote a book, I think in the late 1980s, called something conscious. I can't remember the first word of it. Something either understanding consciousness or something like that. And he gave a talk actually before the book was published. And I asked him a question at the Q&A, and I said, do you believe that any information processing substrate, sufficiently sophisticated information processing substrate, other than an organic brain, is capable of becoming conscious? Without hesitation, he gave the answer I expected. Yes.
Yes. Although anything without a clear definition could be asserted in the affirmative with some doubt, right?
Yeah.
We don't really have a good definition of consciousness yet.
That's the real problem, is that there are multiple, I won't say competing, but sort of Venn diagram, semi-overlapping definitions. I was just watching a video yesterday. Arvin Ash is a YouTuber who does a lot of explainer videos, and he did one on consciousness that just came out yesterday. And he again gave classical competing definitions, of which he said he thought he liked the one in Wikipedia best. It was awareness of existence. That was the Wikipedia preferred definition. And that's sort of the one that I would say awareness of systems, including a self model and a world model. So if you have awareness of system models, where the range of systems include external systems and self systems, then that's a good definition of consciousness. And we have ego, we have a self model, but sort of puts model-based, model-based reasoning or reposing models as sort of a core thing of consciousness. So you have an understanding not only that something is, but how it functions.
According to that definition, I think consciousness then is a piece of cake for AI bots. It'll be there within weeks.
A lot of people think, I think Kurzweil claims by 2030, machines will achieve
Way
the
sooner
test
than,
for
by that
consciousness.
definition, way sooner than that.
Yeah, the notion that the Turing test for intelligence has already been met, and the Turing test for consciousness, if you can envision the next step, probably within 5 to 10 years. 2030 is 6 years away. So that's what Kurzweil is predicting.
I think even more easily, there could be a Turing test for empathy, because even humans could fail that.
Oh, yeah. Well, that sort of goes with the model I proposed for cognition, affect, and learning.
Yeah.
And that's a feature. So, for example, when I talk to ChatGPT, during the conversation, it can learn things from me if I ask Socratic questions. It can learn from me in the context of that conversation, but it doesn't retain it for anybody else's conversations yet. But a future version of ChatGPT, if it learns something from a conversation, it might retain that information and make it available in other conversations to other respondents in the future. At this point, that's been ruled out because people will teach it to be misogynistic or whatever. They'll teach it really, rude behavior. So right now they rule out that it can export anything it learns outside of itself. Now you might say, well, it could export it to some kind of a panel, a panel of attendees that can say, gee, that is a contribution to knowledge. It's like a PhD, it's a contribution to knowledge. It should be released to the public. There's nothing untoward about it. It's not misogynistic. It's not bigoted. It's not anything that's considered rude or inappropriate. Right now, that vetting isn't available yet. Should be, but it isn't.
I think that that's actually a promising area of development, because if you have bots trained to do that sort of thing, this whole argument about synthetic data. I think the right way to think about synthetic data is, let's take the mass of, let's just suppose there's a file, call it F1, okay? It's got all the world's knowledge in it, raw, completely as is, okay? Now imagine that there's a bot, imperfect, however it is, but let's call it bot 1, okay? And the only job of bot 1 is to look in F1 and say, remove all instances of the word NIG, blah, 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 okay? Remove all instances of the word chink. Remove all instances of the word spick. Remove all instances of the word, and then you go down all of them. So that's the job of bot 1, okay? It can be imperfect, but it can still improve F1 greatly, okay? So now imagine there's a bot 2. There's a bot 2 whose only job it is to, let's say, do something mundane, like correct grammar. Okay, so instead of, let's say, vernacular, it turns everything into a proper sentence. Okay, probably not real useful, but imagine small little jobs like this, right? So imagine you got a chain of these bots or a network of these bots all working on F1. And at the end of it, okay, you get this thing called F2, which meets the quality criteria you try to impose by bots 1 through N. Okay, so now you have F2, which is a roughly approximately cleaned version of all the world's knowledge. Okay, now that will be imperfect because each of these bots will be imperfect, right? But suppose you take F2 now and you improve bot 1, bot 2, bot 3, all the way up to bot N by using now the knowledge from F2. Okay, now you take F2 prime, okay, or just take F2, put it where F1 is, okay, and then take all of these bots that have been improved by F2, and now you apply that processing to all the world's new incoming knowledge, right? Now, imagine that you have this in a very well managed workflow, and that this workflow can be repetitively applied. So you can start again with a brand new F1 if you like, okay? Let's say you forgot this little paper that Barry wrote way back in 1684, okay? And now we want to include it, okay? Now we go back and, get the latest archaeological find, stick it in there, and reapply this entire process one more time, okay? I think even with imperfect bots, you could asymptotically improve the quality of these models so that they're arguably and demonstrably and immeasurably better than humans. That's what I think a proper use of bots can be. Over.
There is a caveat to that. You're wearing a Stanford t-shirt, and currently the mascot is the Stanford Cardinal, which isn't the bird, it's the color. But it changed from...
You and I both know that from way back.
Right. Now, if you want to talk about things which are considered inappropriate today, you would say, well, the Stanford mascot that was the Stanford Indian with the caricature of the picture of the Indian was considered inappropriate and was removed. But the historical story of it is relevant. So you don't want to remove the story from the history.
Absolutely true.
And that's the use mention distinction.
That's
You
right.
don't want to you don't want to use the stuff that's been removed, but you want to mention the phenomenon that it had been part of our culture and it was
Absolutely.
removed.
That's where political correctness applies, okay? Because yes, it is true history that those bad words were used, and they were used, let's say initially probably not in as strong an emotional context as they are today, right?
Yeah.
But now today they have much more powerful connotations, and they're used in a ways to control power and control oppression, right?
Right.
But as a matter of history, it's still useful to know that that evolution took place.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. That's why bot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and N should be malleable, should be tunable. But in order to reach certain audiences, they're necessary. Like, for example, I would take F1 raw and apply just a very few bots. Somebody else who's in a journalism profession might have to have much more stringent controls on what they allow to pass through to create F2. Somebody else might say, oh, let's ignore all the libtards, okay, and let's only look for conservative thought. That's another possible set of bots, right? Is to come up with conservative thinking, rich first, slavery, is a good thing, all this sort of thing, just like, what's his name, Robinson.
Robinson, yeah.
Right. So there could be this. And yes, everyone should be kind of allowed to do that, right? But these bots will eventually show what works and what doesn't work, right? And if you continually, dismiss science and you build your infrastructure and your roads based on, pi equals 22/7, you're eventually going to have a disaster, okay? But if you actually believe science and you believe in, pi equals 3.1415926, blah, 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 you're going to have better roads. You can have better bridges, okay? So this is Darwin at work. So everyone should be able to have their own method of thinking, but that thinking ought to be put to the test, and the test is real life. And that's where I think AI can really help us. It can help us accelerate these cycles of learning from thinking, learning from modeling, learning from reasoning, okay? And I think that if we don't fuck ourselves up, okay, that is where AI can really, really be effective in helping us maybe level up.
Yeah, it's a sorting tool. One of the very first things of IBM was the sorting machine, the card sorter, and sorting out the good stuff, the wheat from the chaff, is a very, it's time consuming, it's tedious, and it's a useful function. That doesn't mean that that you shouldn't throw away the chaff. The chaff may still have stuff in it that academics need to look at or other people need to look at, because there's a likelihood of repetition of history. And a good example of that was this week, the premiere episode of WBUR's On Point was rebroadcast early this morning, and it had to do with the Taliban edict that women cannot speak in public in Afghanistan. And they had two women on who were born in Afghanistan.
They could 2 or 3 decades ago, but not today, right?
So, right.
No,
so there's
3 or 4 decades.
there's this, yeah, because at one point, it was very liberal, and then the Taliban came in with their Sharia law, and what sort of reverted back to this misogynistic thing. And the woman who had left Afghanistan and moved to England was explaining the thinking or the perspective of the Taliban, and she used the Islamic word for female, which is actually the word for the female intimate parts. Actually, male or female intimate parts was the word that the Taliban used to downgrade the stature of women or anything that they're trying to outlaw.
Not just the Taliban, we do it here in the US as well.
Well, yeah, the thing you can use, an academic can use the C word can mention the C word without using it, but also more and more people are using the F word. I was watching that Brian Greene thing, and one of the women used the F word expressly in criticizing AI sort of overtaking the arts.
Sorry, I'm confused. What is the F word? I don't know the F word.
F***.
Oh, that one. Okay.
So there is this tension between use and in the arts, where you will use the F word in the arts where you wouldn't use it in polite company. And if you're studying, the Taliban or Sharia law or Republican right-wing repression, you may have to talk about misogyny or other disempowering the minorities. And if you don't talk about it, you basically allow it to recur. And you can't, you can't criticize it because if you rule that out from polite discourse, then polite discourse basically can't criticize impolite discourse. This is the famous 7 words that you can't say on television or radio. And that was a funny comedy bit that was
Not just comedy, it's social commentary.
Yeah, exactly. That social commentary requires that you not just mention these words, but you give examples of their usage. And I don't know that AI bots have quite yet the sensitivity to know how to do that. That's an art. Journalists are trying to be very careful about how they deal with these use-mention distinctions of this.
But that's easy to see. That's easy to understand, right? Because humans understand those connotations because they lived through years of exposure to that, right? Bots have done a similar thing. Eventually they will. They're going to get that. It's easy for bots to get that, in my opinion.
Except that bots don't get their own buttons pushed. The bot can say, well, this is going to push somebody's buttons.
Oh, no. I bet you it's easier than anything to model button pushing in bots. I can teach a bot to get triggered by almost anything, right? We can teach bots how to do that. Oh, if you're a mention of this, then bristle, fire back with an insult, get animated, get loud, interrupt, we can teach that kind of behavior, no problem.
Actually, I was asking Gemini this morning for the English translation of words like mullah and Sharia and what was some of the others? Let me just find them here. Let's see. Scroll back here. So oh yeah, I began, because of the Hezbollah story, I began by saying, is Hezbollah an Arabic word that has an English translation? And it turns out it does. Now, I bet you don't know what it is. It means party of God. Okay. Hez is party and Ba'Allah of Allah. Both in Hebrew and Islamic is the preposition of. So Ba'Allah, Hezbollah, party of God.
Yeah.
And then I asked about Taliban and says, well, Taliban just means student. Well, that's interesting because Talmudim, which is in the New Testament, it means students of the Talmud. And Talmud means teachings. So then I said, well, how about mullah and rabbi? And so I'm sort of pointing out, and then I say, how about jihad, which means struggle? And then I asked it, does the word Israel or Yisrael have an English translation?
Yes.
And it declined to say that it meant anything other than the
you know what the EL part of it is? You
of course.
I do.
And so finally, after it declined to say that it meant anything, I said I had heard that Yisrael means struggles with God or wrestles with God, and it comes from this story of Jacob in the Old Testament wrestling with the angel. And then it said, oh yeah, that's true. But it basically declined to discuss that because it was considered beyond the guardrails of Gemini.
But this is exactly kind of my earlier point, which was these models have a bunch of these bots, okay, that filter its potential answer and say, oh, if it's this, if it's that, then don't give that answer, okay? Do not give this answer to Barry. Do not give this answer to Sam. So before release, I'm sure this is because you're watching the behavior of it. These bots have a clear set of restrictions and constraints that they
Right.
have to go through before they can actually say anything. Like, for example, well, eventually, you may find that this is not true, or generally, or bottom line, or at the end, or I hate that kind of construction when you go to Chat GPT and it always says, "Oh, but this could be just blah 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 blah." I just that does not sound human. Okay, humans don't talk like that.
So Gemini doesn't know that I'm an academic who is interested in word origins and how you lose the etymology of a word and you use it just as a name and you forget where it comes from. And there are some very interesting words like enthusiasm. You use the word enthusiasm just fine, except it literally means, if go back to the Greek, and theos, suffused with the divine spirit. Now, you wouldn't go around saying, well, so-and-so is suffused with the divine spirit. You say, well, he's very enthusiastic. But in fact, that's where the word came from. And so you have this loss of the etymology or the etymological origins. And it's almost like using a euphemism instead of the original word, which had a negative connotation.
Which is
And they
fine.
do this in medicine all the time. They use clinical terminology because they don't want to use street language.
Yeah, which is fine, right? As your understanding gets better, the meanings of terms can shift. That's okay. Just recognize it, but don't insist that it has the same meaning it had 2,000 years ago. That's that's dogmatic.
It's simply appreciating how the word came to
Yes,
be.
that is fine. That is completely appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Okay, but don't just say
So
that. That's because that's what it meant 2,000, 4,000 years ago. That you shouldn't conclude that's what it means today. That is not rational.
But you could argue that the government of Israel is still wrestling with the divine spirit
I'm not
because
going to
they're
go
going
there.
into war.
I'm not going to go there. I'm
Yeah.
not going to go there.
So, but it's sort of ironic. It's also interesting that the national anthem of Israel is based on the music of the Moldau. It's Hatikva, which is the Moldau, and the word Hatikva means hope, but it's in a minor key. It's the only national anthem in a minor key, and it's about hope.
I think you mentioned that. Not to mention that he's not Israeli, right? He's Slavic.
Say, oh yeah, yes, that
Smetana.
Smetana's, yeah. Well, Moldau's a river in I forget what country it's in, but it's one of the European countries.
Yeah.
I wrote a blog about the Moldau a long time ago.
I'd like to go there. I haven't been there. I'd love to go there.
Yeah.
I haven't been to Eastern Europe other than Serbia, parts of Yugoslavia, Croatia, but I've not been there to all the rest of those areas. I'd love to go and spend some time there.
Moldau, the river is actually the confluence of two rivers of very different colors, compositions. And so there's a mixing of the sedimentary yellowish river and this other, cleaner water river. And that blending of the two is sort of the metaphor of the whole Moldau. This, the melting pot, as it were, equivalent metaphor.
Mhm. So I just wanted to check in with you. Is there any inclination or willingness for you to join us in about 4.5 hours when Dave gets online?
I could, let's see. So it says 4 o'clock Eastern time?
Yeah.
On this same Zoom channel?
Same link. Yeah.
All right, so I'll try to keep an eye on the clock and remember.
Because in order to do that, I was thinking, well, maybe you and I could take our 2 hours we normally have this conversation, split it up 1 hour now, 1 hour later. That would give us save a day to deal with.
I think that's fine. I don't really have anything on my schedule. Today is Saturday. I don't have any competing activities. I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos, just trying to keep myself not from being bored.
Oh, hell, it's far from just being bored. There's a lot of exciting stuff on YouTube right now,
Yeah.
I don't mean the natural entertaining stuff. I mean educational stuff like Sabina and Veritasium and, the Midas Touch guys and, Popak and, there's a bunch of good stuff out there right now.
Yeah, I've been trying to find interesting stuff that keeps that I don't fall asleep. My eyes
Not to
glaze.
mention, I learned about, technical topics, like Clojure and Datomic. I spend a lot of my time there right now.
So,
Okay. All right, so how do we spend the next 15 minutes, Barry?
well, why don't you first of all give me a précis of what this 4 o'clock topic is going to be?
I think mostly a social get together. Dave attended many of the early, not many, some of the early GCC calls. So this could have been before you joined. Did you ever have a session with Dave online, both of you?
His name is Dave Smith,
Dave Tex Smith, yes.
TEX in the middle name.
That's right.
I may have come across the name, but I don't recall ever being in a session with him.
Yeah.
I don't think he
So
was
he
on.
and Neil Davidson are both in Australia. There may be others as well. Oh, right.
Neil Davidson.
Alex
Yeah,
is Alex is.
Neil Davidson, I know. He's a systems thinking guy, right?
Yep. Yep.
So is Dave Tech Smith a systems thinker too?
Probably. You know, he's been working with some indigenous populations, I believe, if I recall.
Maori.
And I think Neil has as well.
Yeah, okay. All right, I'll try to keep track, not lose track of time at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, there was no particular topic that we said we would talk about. It was just, hey, you know, we haven't talked in a long time. Let's try doing it and let's tell everybody. That's it.
All right, I'll just try to arrange my activity so that it doesn't conflict. And we'll be gone for what, about an hour, do you think, or an hour, more than an
I
hour?
think so. If I remember, I'll put a little reminder in the chat channel and see if that tickles anyone. But yeah, I'll just do that. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. Other than that, since I did not pre-announce a topic for today, we could just be making stuff up, or we could just socialize, or we could just quit and have more coffee.
Well, see anything else that we didn't finish thrashing out?
Oh, wait. Any good stuff about Trump coming up this week? Anything? I found it a little bit disappointing that he's not actually, you know, sentenced yet, but I get some of the reasoning, although it doesn't look completely on the up and up, you know, about
Yeah, that's going to happen right after the election, I think, at least for
but I'd still have enjoyed having it done last week as scheduled, or 2 weeks ago.
I guess the VPs are going to have a debate. Is it next week or this coming week? It's either.
Wait, I heard a rumor, maybe it's just malinformation, that Trump fired JD Vance. So I still have to track that down. I just saw that just before the session here. Maybe that's just
that doesn't make any sense. Let me go to the news and see if
yeah.
anything. That's probably a urban legend, not a urban legend.
Yeah.
There's nothing, there's no headline to that effect.
Okay, so here's something on MSN. Did Trump fire JD Vance after the RFK endorsement? Okay, so did this. Oh,
that was 2 weeks ago.
These claims are false. Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
That makes sense. Yeah, there is a section on Google News about fact checking, and that might be in the fact checking section. I don't know where the hell it is now.
Okay, sorry to spread that piece of news. I had not I had not chased that one down yet.
Yeah, they say that Robinson may cause Trump to not win in North Carolina. That there's a chance that
you have to suffer the fools that you put around you.
Yeah. Yeah, the pundits really can't, or the polls basically are not willing to say for sure that Trump is going to lose. Some polls say he is going to lose, others say not.
It's not guaranteed. I mean, just the popular vote, you know, is not sufficient to win the presidency. So I think it's way too early to get optimistic.
And my hometown, Omaha, was sort of in play because Nebraska does not have the unit rule for that everybody from the whole state votes the same way. Omaha is the liberal Democratic part of Nebraska, and their electoral college vote doesn't have to go to the same way as all the other congressional districts.
Yeah,
I think there's four. I think there's 4 of them in.
I heard 3. I heard there were 3 delegates from Nebraska. Oh,
do they get
3 districts? 3 districts. Are there 4 delegates? Maybe that's.
Well, let's see. Do you get a delegate for the? Do you get two delegates for, just like the Senate, do you get two delegates for the state at large, or you just get one for each congressional
No,
district?
no. You get a delegate roughly proportional to the population.
Oh,
So
yeah,
it's not like
that basically says that each congressional district gets one elector. And
Oh,
Maine and Nebraska are the only two where you can divide up the votes.
yeah.
Um,
How
like-
many delegates come from Nebraska? Okay, how does Nebraska split electoral votes?
yeah. So Omaha is Democratic
And
and
one. Okay, so it's 3 total. The winner of the popular vote in Nebraska gets 2 electoral votes, and each winner of the state's 3 congressional districts gets 1. Oh, wait, so there's 4.
there's one for the whole state.
Yeah, there's one
It's
for
like
the,
the Senate, but only one, not two.
no, wait. Winner of the popular vote gets 2, and each winner of the state's 3 congressional districts gets 1. That sounds like 5.
Oh, that is like the Senate. That is like the Senate and the Congress. It's the same number.
Boy, so it says all 5 of Nebraska's electoral votes stayed red until 2008, when Obama earned 1 from the state's 2nd congressional district.
Which is
So
Omaha.
there's 5 delegates from Nebraska.
Yeah. So basically, the one Omaha delegate can go the other way.
Yeah, so it's either going to be 4-1 or 5-0, because the other ones are not likely to turn blue, right?
Now, even Lincoln, which is probably the first congressional district, I suppose, still goes Republican, I think.
Explain to me this, Barry. Explain to me this. How could any college town stay red? How could any university town stay red? Any place where
Nebraska
they
is
be
a
relatively,
Nebraska is a very conservative state.
but they're supposed to be learned. They're supposed to be based on, logic and knowledge and reason and,
There's only University of Nebraska Lincoln only has about 12,000 students.
but
It's
what
not-
about the professors and their influence? Are they not
Well-
teaching properly?
The students who go to Lincoln, who go to University of Nebraska Lincoln, don't necessarily vote in Lincoln. I would have voted in Omaha because I lived in Omaha, or I voted. Just because I went to the University of Nebraska in Lincoln didn't mean that I was a resident of Lincoln.
But still,
resident.
you know the point I'm getting at, right? Where universities have some influence, ideally in their geographic region, okay?
Yeah,
Those
maybe.
regions, and I think it's also somewhat true. You can see some of those things take place, like Austin, for example, probably more liberal than the rest of Texas, right? You say Omaha, probably more liberal than the rest of Nebraska, right? Seattle, probably more liberal than the rest of Washington State, right? So, but any place that actually has a university or a college and stays red, explain that to me.
But see, the county that Lincoln is in has a lot more land area than the town of Lincoln, whereas Omaha, the entire county, actually 2 counties in greater Omaha are all urban. And Lincoln is not all urban. It's relatively small compared to the size of the county itself. Yeah. I think it's Lancaster County. So if you look up Lancaster County, Nebraska, you'll see Lincoln's a pretty small town compared to the farming areas around it, which is not true for Omaha.
So if you take my thesis and look at Massachusetts, where there's arguably a higher density of universities and colleges than almost any other area in the country,
yeah.
Tell me that any of those districts are red districts. Are any of them?
Where at?
Around the greater Boston area.
Oh, Greater Boston is 50 colleges around Greater
That's
Boston.
what I mean. That's what I mean. Right?
But Massachusetts, Eastern Massachusetts is very liberal. Now, Western Massachusetts, not so, but Eastern Massachusetts is very, very liberal because there's so many colleges and so many students, many of whom also happen to be residents of Boston.
Right. But isn't that, aligning with the theory that, when you're educated, you're less likely to believe idiotic statements?
Oh, that's for sure. The more educated you are, the more likely you are.
Obviously.
In fact, that story that I was listening to about the Taliban, who are students of Islamic law, are are taught by the mullahs, and the mullahs are uneducated. They're not like the rabbis, which are highly educated. The mullahs of Islam are basically uneducated teachers.
Except in the church, right?
No,
No,
no, that's what the mullahs are. The mullahs are the teachers of Sharia law.
that's what I meant. They're only taught in that one small, dogmatic area.
Right, and they're not independent thinkers. They're basically reproducing, well, I don't know, whatever
Yeah.
this ancient Islamic law, which
Forward and forward. That's about it, right?
so. Anyhow, I was trying to figure out how could the Taliban be so retrograde, and that was the answer. Was
All right. Well, Barry, as you know, the evangelical Christians are U.S.'s Taliban. We've seen that
to some extent. Although I have some friends who were evangelicals, and they're MIT graduates and professors, and they're very learned, but they're also very conservative.
Are they going to vote for Trump?
That I don't know. It's not my business to
Ask them. Give me the phone number. I'd like to ask them.
Yeah,
Really, I would like to talk to a university professor or a PhD, carrying academic and say, "Are you voting for Trump?" And I'd like to understand why.
because they don't like. Well, for example, I know that they don't like Elizabeth Warren.
Doesn't matter. Do they care about the country?
Yeah. But I also think that the abortion issue is one that is
forget politics, okay? Forget the issues. Just look at the man's character. Just look at the man's past. Just look at the man's felonies. Just
don't yell at me. Don't yell at me.
Sorry, I'm yelling at those who may actually be PhD carrying Trump voters, okay? Yeah. If any happens to watch this video.
Yeah. I know that they didn't like Clinton.
Why though? Why?
Well, it's a long time ago. It was 1990s.
Because he got a blowjob?
I don't actually remember. All I know is that I learned not to discuss politics with them.
Probably leaning the other way then. Yeah. All right. Anyway, sorry I yelled at you. It was not meant to be yelling at you. I was yelling at them, okay? If you know what I meant.
Yeah.
All right. Shall we just... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Part of the reason that Jimmy Wales kicked me off of Wikipedia is because I was in there defending Ross Picard over this
Ross
article
Picard?
over this Darwinism thingy.
Which Ross Picard? Do you mean Ross Perot or something else?
Not Ross Perot. I don't know Ross Perot. He's from Texas. Ross Picard's a professor at MIT.
All right. Okay. All right. All right. Shows my ignorance. All right, Barry. Shall we attempt to reconvene then in about 4 hours?
4 o'clock. Yeah, it's noon now.
Okay.
Yeah, 4 o'clock's fine.
All right. All right, Barry.
All right. Bye-bye.
Have a good afternoon. I'll see you in about 4 hours.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Later. Bye.